right, take it away, Megan. You're muted.
So sorry. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan. I support the San Francisco Onsite Water Reuse Program here at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. I support Taylor in running this, and I'm excited to kick off this webinar with you. So first, I wanted to introduce our panelists to you all. From Epic Cleantec, we have Aaron. Aaron is the co-founder and CEO of Epic Cleantec, a leading water technology company deploying on-site water reuse systems across the built environment. He is a 2023 World Economic Forum top innovator. He and Epic have been recognized by Time, Fast Company, for their work advancing decentralized water infrastructure. We also have Adam. Adam is the co-founder and CEO of Waterleaf, where he has spent nearly a decade developing nature-based water reuse technology, including the estuary residential gray water reuse system. A National Onsite Scholar with a Master of Landscape Architecture, he speaks regularly on ecological design and the co-benefits of nature-based water reuse. We have Ray. Ray is a senior director with Building Resilient Futures at Enterprise Community Partners. He oversees and directs the Enterprise Green Communities work. And since 2011, Ray has co-led the technical development of the Green Communities criteria and developed the original Green Communities certification process over a decade ago. Last, we have Zach. Zach, do you want to introduce yourself and go off mute?
It's okay, Megan. Zach Gallagher, President and CEO for NSU. We design, build, and operate on-site treatment and reuse systems. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So I wanted to introduce the San Francisco On-Site Water Reuse program for those that are not super familiar with this. So San Francisco has a NPO mandate. What this does is it requires buildings over 100,000 square feet to install on-site water reuse systems. Um, Projects that are less than 100,000 square feet aren't required to necessarily install and operate them, but we do encourage them to think about this, consider this, and they are required to submit water budget calculators to us. And so we have a couple requirements for these buildings. So these buildings that are mandated to comply with our ordinance and install these reuse systems, if they are a commercial building, they must collect black water and condensate and use this for the required end uses of toilet flushing and drain trap priming. For residential and mixed use buildings, they must collect gray water and condensate and use this for toilet flushing, drain trap priming, clothes washing, and irrigation. So we have our program that has evolved over time. We began in the year 2012, where we allowed single building on-site water reuse. In 2013, we expanded this to include district scale on-site water reuse, which is allowing systems to cross property lines so that you can maximize water sources and maximize sending the end uses to the most amount of people that need it. In 2015, we implemented this mandatory requirement of on-site water reuse for buildings, new constructions of over 250,000 square feet. And in 2021, this was amended to be for buildings over 100,000 square feet. That brings us to today. Our program is currently undergoing some changes to our program to align with new state regulations. And one of the notable features of these new state regulations are the introduction of prescribed treatment trains. I will go into this a little bit more maybe after the panel discussion, but here are some updates to our program. So moving on to our San Francisco program, there are almost 70 systems that are operational and permitted, with 29 in various work in progress stages. This could be in design stages or construction stages. We have a couple of projects that we wanted to spotlight. We've got Salesforce Tower, which is a voluntary project that collects black water and rainwater. We've got 1550 Mission. That is also a mandatory project that collects gray water and rainwater for toilet flushing and irrigation needs. And we also have Moscone Center. This project collects rainwater, foundation drainage, and steam for toilet flushing, irrigation, and street cleaning end uses. And with Moscone Center, this project was supported by SFPUC's grant program, where they were awarded $500,000 to offset a target of 30 million gallons of water. And since their initial application, they have since completed this target goal of 30 million gallons of water offset, and they've fulfilled their grant obligations. Now, onsite water reuse is not limited to just San Francisco. We have a program that mandates onsite water reuse, but voluntary projects, other programs also exist across the country and across the world. A few spotlighted projects include Solaire in New York. This treatment system includes a membrane bioreactor, UV, ozone. They also have a heat recovery system that offsets 5% of the building's energy demand. We also have a really cool project, Canal Cafe in Italy, where they have water drawn in from a lagoon, which also is then filtered through a biofiltration system, a natural membrane bioreactor, micro wetland, artificial filtration, reverse osmosis, and UV disinfection to produce distilled water that was ultimately used in a coffee product. And the last, we have Kuilea Place in Hawaii, where they're collecting gray water for toilet flushing and irrigation needs, with the plan to reduce water demand by 43%. So going into the topic of this webinar, SFPUC, with the support of consultants from SRT, we issued a report on the co-benefits of onsite water reuse systems at the end of 2025. This will be shown later on at the end of the webinar, where you can find out how to access the report. But essentially, the goal was to communicate to people and inform them of the clear value of onsite water reuse systems and the multiple benefits of it. And we all know that the primary benefit of onsite water reuse is that it saves water, but there's a lot more value that comes from that, including benefiting individual tenants and residents of a building, our communities, and the greater environment. There are kind of four main topics that make up these co-benefits. So stepping through the first one would be water systems resilience. Using onsite water reuse reduces reliance on the limited water supplies that are vulnerable to drought. You can lessen discharge sent to sewer systems and wastewater treatment plants, and you can reduce strain on the potable supply system. Number two, it can also be a method of environmental enhancement. So increased urban green spaces helps to reduce the localized heat island effect, and the integration of nature-based solutions helps to improve local ecosystems' health. And nature-based solutions can include applications such as rain gardens, bioswales, constructed wetlands, ponds, planted permeable pavements, green roofs, and green walls. And all these solutions can help add to the natural elements, support emotional well-being, and improve quality of life for the communities that are around it. And social and equity benefits are also something that can be gained from the onsite water reuse system. When applied to housing and particularly affordable housing applications, it has the potential to generate social and equity co-benefits. And the final piece being financial. And there are many drivers of onsite water reuse, including pursuing green building certifications and reputational benefits, which increase the value of a building project. Water savings may also transfer to reduce monthly water bills and lower wastewater charges. And I will stop there and turn it over to Taylor to kick off the discussion. And let me stop sharing my screen so we can get into the discussion.
Thank you. Well, welcome again to our panelists. I'm gonna start with a question. What drew you into working in the onsite water reuse space, and what is your role within your organization? So I'll start with Adam, then we can move to Zach, Aaron, and Ray.
Thanks, Taylor. It's a real honor to be here with these other panelists. Thanks for having me. I'm Adam DeHeer, CEO, co-founder of Waterleaf. I have a background in landscape architecture, design, build, and I came into water through an ecological sanitation perspective, where I was using landscape scale solutions to treat black water on site for safe discharge. And I also got introduced to sanitation and water as a global problem in graduate school, which inspired me to develop a productized version of a constructed wetland so that we could make on-site water reuse and nature-based solutions more accessible to everybody.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks.
Taylor, appreciate the question. For me, it was fear. I grew up in a very rural area of New Jersey. We had well and septic challenges, and shower timers in my house were common before they were mainstream. But the shower timer was not a timer itself. It was my mother banging on the bathroom door saying your 30 seconds was up and the well was going to go dry. So that's where my kind of passion for water began. And I went to Rutgers University in bioenvironmental engineering, studied engineering, but then really started to research how important water was. Reading a lot of journals, articles that water will become the next cause of war between nations, and water is the next oil. And so that's where my passion about water really kind of evolved. And my role within the company is president and CEO, but started out in engineering and worked through construction and operations and really value the full kind of turnkey experience that we're able to offer. So that is NSU.
I missed the order. Am I up?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Good. Yeah, look, on paper, my journey into founding Epic Cleantec doesn't make a lot of sense. I wanted to be a veterinarian, then I wanted to be a chef. Then I did a brief stint in nightlife. Then I went and worked in federal politics, and then I became a glorified plumber, building what is now Epic Cleantec. But I started this company with my father, who actually I see is one of the attendees here. So, hi, Dad. My father is an MEP engineer, and my father came over from the Soviet Union as a political refugee, leaving aerospace science and moving into building design. And over a decade ago, he was designing a hotel in Berkeley, California. And the developer, as many developers do, wanted to design the greenest possible building. And obviously, there's a huge amount of focus, a lot of thought and options when it comes to energy conservation, decarbonization, when it comes to sort of a comprehensive look at a building's water usage and specifically water recycling. The field wasn't very developed, both in terms of the technologies that could do it, but actually probably more importantly, and for the purposes of this conversation, how do you actually permit these things? And that was sort of the starting point for us realizing like there maybe is an opportunity to do something different here. Again, over a decade ago. Obviously, San Francisco then became the first city in the country to actually require on-site water recycling. And I think part of what's unique about our story is that all four of our co-founders at Epic come from outside of the water sector, meaning we don't know, we didn't know what we didn't know. In fact, some of the early conversations we had with Taylor and the team at the PUC was them laughing us out of the room because we didn't know the terminology, we didn't know what we were talking about. But I think taking that sort of that new look, that new view at how buildings can be designed ended up being a secret weapon for us of a bunch of people who didn't know what we didn't know. So that's the genesis story of Epic Cleantec.
That's a great story, Aaron. Thanks everyone for having me join you today. I'm Ray Demers with Enterprise Community Partners. I'm based in Boston, so not the local market of Enterprise, who you probably all know pretty well for our affordable housing work out there. My day-to-day is operating, overseeing, and managing our Green Communities criteria, which is a national standard for affordable housing, which has been adopted in 22 states or local finding QAPs, including Washington, D.C. and New York City, and doing a bunch of work at the intersection of design, construction, and affordability. What drew me in here is pretty simple. I do not come from a water engineering standpoint or perspective. I'm trained as an architect, but I like solving problems, and we like to try to use affordable housing to solve problems. And every operating dollar really matters in the affordable housing space. So as water and sewer costs rise and the drought pressures intensify, and we see in communities in places like Colorado and Utah and California, are starting to see permits slow down because their water systems can't support the new connections. Water starts to look less like an environmental amenity, and it becomes a real housing production and housing stability problem. And that's, I know the Abundance book came out last year, and there's a lot of talk about the challenges that are happening within the political system that prevent affordable housing. But we really think there's something to be done here to sort of meet those resilience demands, meet the sustainability demands, and generate the production of more affordable housing nationwide. So I'm happy to be on this panel and to join you all today.
Thank you. Those were great introductions. I like to talk about people's personal journeys, water is very personal, and I think it's inspiring, especially to younger folks that are looking to join this space, to hear how veterans like you all, got to where you are. So I appreciate you sharing that. Um, all right. This question, I'm going to start with you, Zach, and then others can chime in. As Megan mentioned, our report focused on a number of co-benefits, including water systems resilience, environmental enhancement, social and equity, and financial benefits. How do you see these co-benefits play out in practice, and which ones have been the most meaningful in your experience?
Sure, Taylor, thanks. I think I'll start with just the resiliency and the wet weather benefits that I think get overlooked a lot. For a very long time, people would ask NSU, why are you not on the West Coast initially? Why did you start on the East Coast, where you have water abundance and water conservation is not as important as it is out West or in the South and things of that nature. And so even back then, 20 years ago, we still had these areas where our sustainable supply was just not there, even on the East Coast, and water reuse and conservation was very important. New York City really started because they had leaking aqueduct systems and needed to figure out how to supply 9 million people with 30% of their supply going down and conservation being important. So that's how it started. But I think the co-benefit of resiliency, wet weather benefits is now starting to get understood. And was missed for a very long time. But I think what really made it obvious for people here is that when we had Superstorm Sandy, NSU operates about 100 systems that were in the influence of Superstorm Sandy. Not a single one of those systems went down or violated permit conditions. And we had safe, affordable water supply and clean water services to those 100 plus systems. And it wasn't because they were managed differently in terms of what we were doing with them. It was we were not really located in areas of very low lying conditions down towards the ocean. We were decentralized. We had available fuel to these systems that kept them running. And so people are realizing that these are not just water conservation plays. They're also in areas of combined sewer overflow challenges, especially in all of our coastal urban cities. These really much have a benefit to those areas. And people are starting to realize that. So I think resiliency, combined sewer overflow mitigation is a co-benefit that has been overlooked, that is starting to become mainstream. And then outside of that, the ability to incorporate biodiversity, nature systems, which we're going to get into here shortly, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. Energy recovery, which we'll talk about. And then one that we were probably not going to talk about that I think is important is the other benefits that maybe aren't as measurable. A lot of universities are looking at this in terms of increased academic programs, research and development. So program activities as well is another benefit that I think people overlook, that we're starting to integrate into the value chain, certainly in some industries like academia and institutions. And I'll stop there.
Thanks. Others want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add one, which is the social aspect, which again, I think taking the West Coast perspective or just generally the West, if you live here in California or anywhere throughout the Southwest, you are just inundated with the challenges that we face with water. When you drive down from Northern California to Southern California through the Central Valley, you see all of our farmers with signs up saying no water, no food. people who intimately understand the importance of water, perhaps better than most. And I think whether it's with water or just generally with our climate challenges, I think people feel a sense of helplessness of what can I as an individual do. All we do is read about nations and large corporations that are responsible for some of these large challenges. So what can we as an individual do? And I think there is something very powerful for a building, whether it's an office building or a multifamily building, the places where people spend their money to live, work, and play, putting that money towards a project that prioritizes this as a sort of a value that matters to the project. And I have a lot of anecdotes. I mean, even just sitting in the elevators of a place like Salesforce Tower, it's the largest, tallest, most prominent project in San Francisco, and people, without knowing that they're in the elevator with an Epic Cleantec person talking about, oh, did you know that this building is recycling all of its water? Like, people are excited by this stuff. They're looking for places that are allowing them to sort of live by their own values. Now, all that being said, and it sounds very nice and flowery, the financial piece in our view is the single most important driver of whether or not a project is going to happen. Now, obviously, take out of the equation a San Francisco or in Austin or other places that are mandating or incentivizing on-site water reuse. Without those, the folks that we work with, the owners and the developers of these projects, it's all about what is the financial incentive for me to do this. And I think that's an incredibly important part of the equation, and to pretend that it's not, I think is a disservice. But then again, look, I think one thing we talk about all the time with these folks is, these projects today are being built to last 50 to 100 years. You really got one chance in a new construction project to do this and do it right. And so when it comes to hedging against water and sewer rates that are only going to go up, I don't see anywhere where those are going down. This is your best shot to be able to lock in lower water and sewer rates, and to Ray's point, to help control that OPEX, to help control that net operating income, which is the single most important measurement for a lot of these projects. So it's both sort of a near-term and a long-term play when it comes to the financial piece.
If I might chime in, I want to build off some things Aaron said. I think he's right to point out that, water is something that, or water reuse is one way that people get connected to their water. And I think one of the reasons that we're in the water situation that we're in now, what the UN has described as water bankruptcy, is because we're not connected as a culture to our water. We don't, it's out of sight, it's out of mind, it's cheap, it's guaranteed. And nature-based solutions and nature-based water reuse help make that tangible. So this guy, the woman in the elevator, they might see a green wall or a lagoon or constructed wetland in the courtyard and have a more personal connection to it, not just some abstract idea, but actually see it and be connected to the water cycle, which we're all part of. Now, I do think a kind of perspective shift and cultural change does underlie a lot of behavior, but today in this market, money talks, and nature-based solutions can also be cheaper. So, constructed wetlands have been a lower cost solution for municipal wastewater treatment for decades. If you're able to containerize that and put it in a beautiful package, you can also have some cost advantages that make water reuse pencil out. So I think to Aaron's points, there are, I think a way to, and even to raise, I've seen 80,000 homes in Phoenix can't be built because they can't prove a 100-year water supply. A co-benefit of on-site water reuse, increasing the housing supply, unlocking development opportunities. There's a lot of things that get overlooked when we consider the benefits of water reuse.
Yeah, it's gonna be a long afternoon, well, morning for you all if I go forth in this group, because all the best points have been taken. But color in between the lines a little bit, I think we run a national green building program so co-benefits are kind of how we talk about a lot of decisions you make at pre-construction, into site planning, into building systems, into operations. So like this sort of co-benefit concept is the one that really resonates the most with us as we're thinking about sustainability. When it comes to water and water reuse, I think that the co-benefits that show up the most are the ones around operating budgets and long-term asset sustainability. Water and sewer costs are a real thing, and they're rising line items for affordable housing operations. So reducing potable water demand reduces that exposure to risk. The SFPUC's own estimates suggest that replacing potable water for toilet flushing, urinal flushing, and laundry with non-potable sources can offset up to 40% of indoor potable water use. That's huge. That's enormous. And that scales up the more you can sort of get it implemented across projects. But to sort of Zach's point about resilience being the more prevalent or more better case to be made, affordable housing residents are the least equipped to absorb utility disruptions and cost spikes. A building with more distributed, resilient water infrastructure is a more stable home for the people living in it. That's not an environmental argument necessarily, but it is a housing stability argument. And I think that's probably, at this time, the best co-benefit case to be made in the development of affordable housing.
Thank you. Those are all super thorough answers. I appreciate that. All right, my next question is around partnerships. And it's critical, I think, as we all know, to have partnerships to do this work, to collect data and do research. What are some examples of successful cross-sector partnerships you've made, and what new partnerships do we need? I'll start with Adam, and then others can chime in.
I think obviously this sector is a collaborative one. If you've spent time in it, you know that people are working to solve problems together. So people are eager to make partnerships. Having partnerships at different scales, both private and public, I think have been a critical part for our growth. We've been supported by the EPA and the National Science Foundation at the federal level with SBIR and research and development grants and commercialization grants. We've worked with the state of Oregon, business development, worked with New Mexico and Oregon on permit and regulation, design and implementation, and worked with strategic partners that have bigger leverage to bring technology to market. So Waterleaf is a small startup that has designed a on-site graywater reuse system, nature-based graywater reuse system for a single-family home scale. So we operated at a scale where builders and developers and architects are also key partners for bringing this technology into market. So at the policy level, working with individual regulators as well to be able to understand their priorities with their stakeholders, their constituents. And then we're actually working with, trying to build relationships with Recode and IAPMO to make sure that we get the right UPC standards for nature-based solutions as well. So it really takes a whole network of connections to really do this. And to Aaron's point earlier, like understanding the policy is a critical part of this. Every jurisdiction has a different permitting pathway. And so it really takes a lot of work to build relationships with all those people and all those different jurisdictions.
I was going to speak, but Ray, did you want to go so you're not fourth this time?
No, well, sure. I'll go second this time, and then I'll go fourth again later. My answer is probably a little bit different, right? Like we're a sustainability standard, so we're working primarily with housing finance agencies and local housing departments because for our projects, most projects have some public funding in them, whether it's LIHTC or something else, low-income housing tax credits. Because that's where financing decisions happen, that tends to be where we get involved because the city or state will have sustainability, resilience, health, green building goals, and we kind of slide in to support that. But ultimately, like you're looking for something where cross-sector partnerships with the water sector and affordable housing finance can really like blend and get on the same page. And I know I don't need to pitch advocacy to anyone in your area, but I think that when those making the decisions hear from folks about what their priorities are and what's important, it allows those in the policy space, the regulatory space, to be able to craft regulations that better support what those goals are. So so we're probably a little bit different than the other folks on the panel.
Yeah, I'd say certainly on the builder side, the design community, the architects, engineers, contractors, those are incredibly important partners because, for those of us in the space, this just seems obvious, but we often forget that for the last few centuries, people have been designing buildings a certain way, which is we bring water in and we send wastewater out. Asking people to now start recycling wastewater on site for many folks is a very big ask, especially when you couple in the additional piece that we have conditioned society to think that wastewater is waste, that it is yucky, that we are supposed to get rid of it. So, we work with the most sophisticated real estate owners and developers in the world who have the same understanding of wastewater as my 7-year-old niece, because that is how we have designed buildings. So there's a huge education component, a partnership component that happens. Now that the first wave of projects has happened in places like San Francisco, some of the biggest builders, designers have done this. Now they're excited to do it again because it's no longer scary. So that's, I think, a huge and critical partnership is just educating that entire world of folks on how to do this. And I think also on the regulatory front, and I'm not just saying this because Taylor and the SFPUC team are here, but working with regulators is incredibly important because we're working at the intersection of two highly regulated spaces, which is water and wastewater and real estate. I like to say we are taking the anti-Uber approach, wherein Uber basically steamrolled the regulators, and when the regulators tried to shut them down, they would flood the inboxes of these city halls with people demanding this service. It doesn't work that way with on-site water reuse. There has to be this very close collaboration, and I see folks from a few different cities and jurisdictions on the call here working together very carefully to take these approaches and tailor them to an individual city, because again, all cities are different. Now, that being said, to Adam's point, we are going to have a big challenge if every single city, county, and state has their own local interpretation of what safe water reuse looks like. We need to start creating sort of a uniform playbook, which is why these partnerships are important. There's the National Blue Ribbon Commission on On-Site Systems, which I think a number of folks on this panel, as well as attendees, are part of. Because look, if you're in the energy space, you're in California, you get in with one utility and you basically have the half the state covered. We need to be able to start crafting those types of approaches with on-site water reuse so it can be copy paste. And we're starting to see some of the early happenings of that, with the program in San Francisco becoming the model for a lot of other places. But those types of partnerships with the regulators and the policymakers, I think is going to be key if this is going to grow.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I think a lot has been mentioned here, so I'll be brief. But from a developer to a local engineering is critical, right? So we do work all over the world, but local engineering and contracting partners are critical. Water is local. You need to have the local operating team there to work with those regulators to get these adopted. So having those local partnerships is critical to making these projects successful. I'll say that it's never been a technology issue. Yes, technology continues to improve. We become more efficient, both cost, operations wise, but it's never been a technology issue. It's been a regulatory kind of adoption issue and perception issue. And so having those local operators to work with the regulators to get these systems approved has been critical. We hit the kind of regulatory inflection, I would say, in the 2015 to 2020 era. SFPUC, obviously, that started in New York City almost 30 years ago. Not a whole lot happened for a decade or decade and a half after that. And then we started to get Blue Ribbon Commission, SFPUC's involvement, really have regulatory change in a number of different areas across the country in that 2015 to 2020 period. But I saw an interesting slide at the Blue Tech Forum last week by Paul O'Gallahan, and it was, even once you have regulatory inflection, it still takes another 5 to 10 years for market adoption. And I think critical to that is where we can make it personal. I think, Megan, to your point before, we have to make this personal for people to understand it, to get involved in it, and to actually adopt it and implement it on their sites, whether that's residential, commercial, or industrial. Panita, saw your question before. We'll get into some of that. And I use Canal Cafe as an example for this, right? Not a very large volume of reuse that we're doing with Canal Cafe, but partnerships with architects, arts and architecture, a different entire body of people that we are getting to now to make it personal. As you know, the Venice canals are illegal to swim in, but to be able to convince the regulators to extract canal water that is very contaminated, to treat it with a natural and mechanical membrane system, and to use it and be backed by Lavazza Coffee and Chef David O'Donnell to drink the canal. It was top news in the New York Times. It was the Gold Line winner at the finale. And we have very cool projects, Solaire and other things, but this one got more publicity because we made it personal. Italians love their coffee, but it was on site, it was decentralized, it was within the community, in Venice, in the Arsenale, and we made it personal and people cared. So we have to work with those local architecture partners and art partners that people have engagement with, and they're always the first ones in to figure out how we make water more personal, more visible, to get it adopted in more places.
Thank you. I'm going to move and shift gears now to talk a little bit about wastewater heat recovery. And Aaron and Zach, I'm going to focus on you two for this question. As mentioned earlier in the slides, heat recovery is the process of capturing and reusing heat energy from on-site water sources that would otherwise have been wasted. That thermal energy can be recovered and used for preheating the cold water supply in a building or space heating in a building as well. Can you tell us about your heat recovery system installations and why you are investing in heat recovery with your on-site reuse systems? And Aaron, I'll start with you, and then Zach, you can chime in.
Yeah, look, I think as someone with a marketing background, I think the term wastewater is in dire need of a rebrand because there really is no waste. It's clean water, obviously, that we can recapture. It's organics and carbon that we can turn into different products like soil or even ceramics. And then obviously there's all of this energy. Uh, the amount of energy that we use to heat water in a building is pretty tremendous, and I think it's actually a huge part of the building's total energy budget. Now, if you think about the amount of water we put into the amount of energy we put into water, typically we send that heated water back into the sewer. So when you're walking on the streets on a cold day in New York or any other East Coast city and you see steam coming up through the manholes, that's just energy that we're losing. And by our team's calculations, were we to recapture that thermal energy out of the wastewater, we could power every electric vehicle on the road today. So essentially, when you put these systems into these projects, we are capturing heated water. That water is oftentimes anywhere from 70 degrees or hotter. Now you can do things with that energy like preheat the building's domestic hot water supply. So you are still pulling in cold water or all sorts of functions in the building, like showering, like cooking. You can basically just transfer that thermal energy from these tanks holding all of this heated water from the building above, use that to preheat the building's domestic hot water supply, and take all of this wasted energy and just reuse it. So we currently have a system functioning with one of the largest developers in the country. There's a tremendous demand for this just because of electrification. Now with the move towards electrification, people are trying to figure out how do we come up with these huge energy loads. And a lot of folks are looking at what are all these latent energy sources within a building. I think wastewater, whether it's coming from a building or whether you're sewer mining from sort of the local supply, is a tremendous opportunity. And I think we're going to see a lot more of it in the coming years.
Thanks, Aaron. Gave a good background there, so I won't focus there. I think maybe to address some of the questions that have come in as well, this can be applied in multiple areas. So, we first got into heat recovery because we were using reclaimed water within cooling towers, evaporative cooling towers, in these residential apartment buildings like the Solaire. And so why are we sending hot water up to a tower that's trying to reject heat? And can we make it more efficient? So as we continue to study and work on optimizing that system, we implemented heat recovery to provide a lower temperature water up to the cooling tower. But also we made our system net energy neutral. So even at the Solaire scale, which is 25,000 gallons a day, we were able to recover about 60,000 BTUs per hour. In doing that, we were able to offset the electrical use. So roughly speaking, a system of the Solaire size is going to use about 350 kilowatt hours per day, and we were able to recover 60,000 BTUs per hour, which is the equivalent of about 400 kilowatt hours per day. So net energy neutral, net energy positive at the 25,000 gallon per day scale and above. If you get higher than that, you can actually become net energy positive and get that back. And now you're supplying a cooler temperature water into the cooling tower area. Puneet, the reason I bring this up as well is because this does not only apply to residential and commercial sectors. You think about the data center, the AI boom, we can use these alternative source of water, whether it's domestic sanitary wastewater or industrial process water, and we can use this to feed water-based cooling as well, which is very prevalent in existing data centers, but also the data center industry is learning that air-based cooling and dry cooling uses a lot more energy. And so they're going back to water-based cooling or hybrids thereof and co-locating these on-site reuse systems where these cooling towers are going to be. So let's recover this water, but not only recover the water, recover the heat and supply that for these areas. As it gets to cost items as well, the first place we did this was McDonald Island up in Alberta, Canada, and they were able to get a energy incentive for this water reuse system that gave them a 1-year return on their investment. So as people are looking at the return on investments for on-site reuse and co-benefits, both look at energy and water together, and your incentives may double, triple, quadruple in some cases, and that ROI is going to become much less as you can cross paths and divide between your water energy nexus initiatives. Back to you, Taylor.
Great. Ray, I'm going to turn to you for this next question. On-site water reuse is not just for affluent communities. There are several precedents of affordable housing developments implementing on-site water reuse. We understand that it fits within affordable housing developers' sustainability and social missions while reducing vulnerability to rising water rates. What communities are you working with that are actively implementing on-site reuse in affordable housing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Taylor. So we're a national program. The water challenge looks different in different regions of the country, but it's real across many of them. In the West, it's the most acute with drought pressures, aging infrastructure, growing climate volatility, and in some cases, water constraints that are starting to affect development feasibility directly. We've seen examples in Colorado where water tap limitations have created what are effectively moratoriums on residential permitting. In Utah, some towns have placed building permit applications on hold as they wait for water connections to be allowed. That makes this a bigger challenge than a green building conversation. In water-constrained communities, reducing potable water demand through reuse isn't just an environmental strategy, it's a housing supply strategy, which I sort of noted earlier. I think Zach's point about the linkage between water use and energy use is a really important one. It's something that's really come up as we've been doing a lot of case studies about projects using green communities criteria. We published a case study earlier last year on Fabrica Lofts, which is a historic renovation of a mill building here in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And that project speaks directly towards how reducing water usage and energy reduction are places where residents are reaping the benefits and the rewards of that. And then another thing I'll just say is that, our standard, which is a green building program similar to others out there, does talk about reducing outdoor water usage through alternative sources and then reducing indoor water usage as well and water reuse. So I think from a where are the sustainability programs showing up in this space? I think they're looking to create a lot of options for folks. So whatever geography you're in, whatever urban condition you're in, whether you're urban, rural, suburban, or in some cases tribal, there's a series of options that you can use to meet what your objectives are, and what you're being regulated to as well.
Thanks, Ray.
Taylor, may I jump in on the affordable housing question
Sure.
real quick?
Go for it.
So I'm excited that one of our first subdivisions is in an affordable housing development. And the reason that they're going with on-site water reuse is because the cost of sewer and water has been double the inflation, that of inflation for the last 25 years. Last year, it again doubled inflation. So, and to Aaron's point, when this pencils out, you have to have, water is cheap in a lot of places, even where it's scarce. And that's something that our technologies have to compete against, because if you amortize the cost of the capital expense over the number of gallons of reuse water you're going to get, for that to pencil out, it has to be cheaper than what you're getting from the tap. On-site reuse also saves on those sewer fees, not just the tap fees. So if you're doing indoor reuse with toilet flushing or with laundry in some cases, you're reducing that load on either the sewer system or the septic system. But on that sewer system, that'll lead to a lower monthly cost on both your sewer and your water. So that's why our affordable housing developer chose on-site water reuse, is the CapEx was low enough over the lifetime of the product to offset the cost of water and sewer, and get an ROI over the time of that product.
Thanks. While you have the mic, Adam, I'm going to turn back to you to talk a little bit more about nature-based solutions for treating gray water and reusing it in homes. Nature-based installations have been successful at many different scales: building, district, municipal. I know your work focuses specifically on horizontal planter systems at the single family scale. Can you talk a little bit about, from the homeowner's perspective, what they need to be aware of when seeking to install a nature-based gray water system in their home?
Absolutely. And I'd also like to address a question in the chat about scale. And I think it relates to a lot of these other questions about benefits and pathways to adoption. Scale, in my perspective, and panelists, please chime in if you agree or disagree, is right now being driven by policy. So Ray was describing this housing crunch. Well, that's being caused by water scarcity. Well, you have states like Arizona who passed HB 2143, which allows for legal reuse of treated gray water in single family homes. So when you do that, that means that builders can now use a technology like ours. As Zach said, technology is not the bottleneck. It's about the opportunity to get it permitted and see a benefit that goes beyond the cheap water in many cases. And so when you have a policy like that, where you can now prove a 100-year water supply with indoor reuse of gray water in a single family home, that is game changing for scale and for adoption within the market. Homeowners that receive a technology like the estuary, a nature-based water reuse system, they can be confident that that digital monitoring system with your Internet of Things is keeping track of system performance. You've got a technician that's maybe associated with a utility or a local service provider that's keeping tabs on things. You can keep tabs on it yourself through your dashboard. It's outside, so you don't need to worry about a wastewater treatment system in your basement. A lot of these engineered systems are in the basements of buildings or in carport or oftentimes a climate-controlled garage. When you have a nature-based system outside, you don't have to worry about bringing wastewater utilities into your home. And then obviously there are all the co-benefits of biophilia. People love plants, and they're just not at their best without them. So On-site reuse allows for water indoors, and if you're not using it for laundry, you're going to get plenty for toilet flushing and little supplement your irrigation. So you don't just need rocks and mulch; you can actually have some plants. Homeowners need to, I think, just become familiar with the general concept of collect, treat, and reuse. The technology's self-regulating. There aren't any consumables. So we've really designed it to be maintenance free with the support of that IoT digital dashboard that we can, like I said, connect with service providers and utility providers to make sure that the uptime is at its full potential. This is not typically something that this is ideal for new construction where you can do the gray water plumbing at the time of construction. We can do retrofits, though it is best if you're doing a remodel in some cases, if you're on a slab. I think that's the biggest thing for homeowners. If it's already built, there are certain situations which make retrofitting more difficult. But there are a million new homes being built every year, and most of them are being built in water scarce regions now.
Thanks, Adam. Just for the audience, Taylor, real quick, in terms of going from a kind of single family home or smaller scales to campus scales, we can still incorporate nature-based solutions as well. And while nature-based solutions or wetland systems, as an example, do scale more linearly than more mechanical systems, you can still incorporate them as a portion of the overall treatment system to bring in those additional benefits and those co-benefits, biodiversity, aesthetics, things of that nature. And so Microsoft and Google both did this on their campuses out in California, where they used wetlands in addition to membranes in order to bring in reused quality water, but still have wetlands incorporated as a part of the treatment system to bring in those additional benefits and have their employees and communities engage with the systems itself to make it more personal and put it on site. So there's a lot of value there, and it can be incorporated at different scales. Sissy, just to conclude your question there, absolutely, you can do these at single building scales like Solaire, where the industry is starting to head is trying to identify exactly what scale is most appropriate within those local areas. So you can have a system like Domino, which is 5 different buildings on a block scale system that has one kind of shared reuse system between those 5 buildings. And then you can start to get more economy of scale and quicker ROIs, but that's not always possible depending on how the lot lines and other rules and regulations are there. So incorporate them in various scales, bring in kind of block scale or district scale systems where you can, depending on other constraints that you may have to reduce the ROI, but you can still make these affordable at various scales.
All right. I'm going to turn to some audience questions in the few remaining minutes that we have here. I appreciate the panelists and Megan addressing the questions as they've come in. I see a question from Daniel. I'm just going to read it aloud here, and then whoever wants to jump in can jump in. Communication is critically important for water reuse. Using the right words, how they're said, and the intention behind what is said, meaning trust issues. As water reuse practitioners working with building systems, how do you deal with the general public, even a lot of engineers and architects, not understanding or caring about the difference between different water types? For example, simply referring to any water that you don't drink as gray water, which may include rainwater. Do you keep trying to educate, or do you give up and adopt gray water as a catch-all term?
Never give up.
Never give
That's
up.
the key thing. Never give up. No, look, so I think my mother, I mentioned my father, my mother's a psychologist, and I think people do have trust issues, but there's a reason for it. And it's because water has, as I think some of the other panelists have said, it's been out of sight, out of mind for the vast majority of folks. This is not something we've ever had to adopt or grapple with because our pipes are underground and they're sent to facilities away from city centers. And so all of a sudden we're like, okay, now we're going to do this and we need you all to understand how everything works and all the terminology. And there's a gap. There's a gap on people where people are where we need them to be. So look, I think there's obviously a lot of approaches. There's the one water approach, which I think many of us are adherents to of all water all water is the same type of water. We judge water by its quality and not by its history. Um, but we also have to understand that there's a lot of misnomers out there. I think people just use the term gray water generically for all building wastewater. And look, as more and more of these systems go into place and start becoming adopted, the industry is also going to learn. And we're talking about architects and engineers and designers, but it's also the folks who are going to be continuing to work in these buildings. It's the operators, it's the building engineers. Frankly, in my opinion, they're probably the most important, the people who actually are going to be responsible for how these systems function. So there's going to be an education component. But look, I think the Canal Cafe is a really great example of meeting people where they are. As some folks know, we launched 2 commercial beer brands, which, by the way, are 2 of the fastest growing craft beers in the country now. We actually outsold Bud Light at the Super Bowl. And that's not a big money maker for us as Epic Cleantec, but it is putting recycled water into the hands of hundreds of thousands of people. I think that's how we start to shift society. And again, we shouldn't get frustrated. We shouldn't give up because we've taught people that they don't need to care about this stuff because our utilities and our entire system is designed so well. So there is an education that's going to need to happen. But look, I think what SFPUC is doing and the educational work that you all are doing to educate the populace is important. I think we need to get really creative with the marketing, and because you can't just put a scientific paper in front of people and expect them to understand what TSS and BOD and COD are. So you need to find different ways to make it relatable.
Yeah, I think gray water and black water have a branding issue. And there's some different issues with the terminology, vernacular. I know there are a lot of different terms being thrown around. Sewage is one of them. I'm not sure that that's any better branding. One of the things we're testing out is renewed water. It gets away from any specific source water and it gets to the heart of one water where it's about the quality of the water. This water has been renewed. So I think it is important to think about fit for purpose and just focus on how it's being reused. And we will design a treatment train around what the source water is going to be. So source water and renewed water.
Zach, you want to chime in?
Sure. I know we're getting to the closing minutes here, so I'll just kind of include concluding thoughts for you, Taylor. But Daniel, thank you for the question. The work that you're doing at USF internationally is certainly, pushing this topic forward. I recently was fortunate to have a conversation with Vetri over at Nike, his global water lead, and he showed a slide which was powerful. It said technology and solutions cannot scale without trust. And I think this is why it took us 15 years to get regulatory inflection, was because we needed to show existing systems that were operating without fail. And I think Battery Park City allowed us to do that. The initiatives that SFPUC in California took with their first systems, we finally got to a point where we were able to show these systems to the regulators and those decision makers and those stakeholders to allow it to happen, because then they had trust with it. Now we're in this next phase where we need to take that trust and actually apply it. And I think to get, we need to make it personal, as we said before, in these examples that the panelists have come up with are doing that. So continue to push, continue to fight the good fight, and we will get there.
Thanks, Zach. Ray, closing remarks?
I would just say you got to match your message with the audience and what they care about. And it's really dumb, but that's what this is all about.
So true.
Agreed, 100%. Well, I'm going to keep us right on time. We just hit the top of the hour. I want to say thank you again so much to Adam, Zach, Aaron, and Ray for being a part of this great panel, for Megan for all the behind the scenes work setting this up and kicking us off at the start. Really, really appreciate you all. And I know everybody is available to answer questions. If something comes up after this that you didn't have a chance to ask, you can get in touch with them directly, or you can also contact me. And actually, I know Megan actually had a few slides that she wanted to share really briefly. So Megan, if you want to come back on and share those, and then we can close it out.
Yeah, so like I said before, we have the full report. Please contact us if you would like to see it. And just acknowledgements, this report was supported by SRT Consultants, so thank you to them. And of course, all our panelists that helped to contribute to this report. We have some additional resources available, general program updates, which is us aligning our program rules and regs to the new state regs. General tentative timeline is we may have a public comment period in July with the rules and regs becoming effective in September. And we will notify stakeholders as the regulations and the program changes throughout over the course of the next few months. And last things, we have some additional resources. I can send the slides out so you all will have access to these resources, and that is it.